Hi there, and welcome to the latest episode of Strata's Orchestration Kitchen. We will be kicking off this year's versions of the series with a new episode around securing cross-border access to global applications. As always, I'm joined by Chef Terry Cozard, who leads our solutions engineering team here at Strata. And we're excited to have you here today because we're really talking about what can identity orchestration do for you when you're a multinational organization and you're thinking about those teams across the globe who are trying to access common applications. And so as we look to this, let's take a quick look at what our agenda will be for today. And we'll follow a typical format that we do for other orchestration kitchens as well. We're going to start with a little brief intro on what identity orchestration is. We'll jump into a whiteboard of what the recipe is going to play out like, and so you can see it in a visual format. We'll get right into the kitchen and we'll start cooking with the recipe, and we'll leave it open for Q&A as always throughout. So please feel free to use your question button if there's any questions you have throughout. And Chef Cozart, thanks for coming back and joining us again on this.
Always happy to participate.
Awesome. Well, as we think to cross-border access for an application, this seems like a recipe that really could fit the bill for any number of enterprises. And as we think about this, we're not just talking about that company that has maybe a regional sales team of 3 or 4 people in London or 2 people in Singapore. Is that right? I mean, we're thinking about global operations.
Yeah, generally speaking, in as we know, in multi-regional and multi-global or multi-country implementations, there's different locality laws, there's safe harbor laws, things where the data about a user in certain regions of the world has to stay there. The access can be governed by that. And that becomes a really challenging paradigm for a lot of organizations because as we've gone to more centralized identity providers and things like that in the organization, it becomes harder and harder to take the context of the people at the edge within any of these regions to give the consistent and appropriate policy for them, especially when somebody in a different region, perhaps APAC, comes to North America to do work. But how do you properly govern their access across them, knowing that you've got split context throughout that? So it becomes really quite a challenge to a lot of organizations, and one we believe we can help people solve.
I love it. I love it. Well, it sounds like another spicy challenge that's made just for orchestration. So without further ado, maybe explain to us a little bit about how identity orchestration works so that we can get a feel for how this recipe is going to play out.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, identity orchestration, as Strata defines it, is we are a decentralized, very light infrastructure that allows you to abstract away all of the common identity related systems. So, all of the different identity functions that you typically work with as you get access to an application can be easily mixed and matched or have multiples across regions, across companies, across business units, however that may play out. So once we are protecting a critical application for the organization, we then can take whatever context that's important. It's fantastic, Mark, that you log in through your North American based identity provider. But if you happen to travel to Asia Pacific and you still want to get access to key applications, perhaps those local rules and regulations will prevent or limit some of that access. We can do that easily because the orchestration can be deployed in a local place close to the application or close to the users or both. And then we can mix and match those policies so you can set a singular policy, but have it be executed differently based on the region of the world that you're in. So as we think about authentication, access control, multi-factor authorization, all of those things are very common things, and we can switch in and out of these things just trivially. But really what makes us so unique in this industry is that we do this in a distributed manner. We're not yet another IDP that says, oh, we're better than the other IDPs. In fact, we're not an IDP at all. We're dependent in making your IDP investments better. But the reality of it is we then can do the last millimeter integration to the applications. So we can do these kind of patterns for even legacy applications, things that don't speak modern protocols like SAML and OIDC. We can protect all of them. We can do that in a multi-region cross-border manner or the traditional centralized manner as well.
I love it. And as we look at the diagram and the flow that you have laid out here, the understanding is that the application, the global resource that we're suggesting people are going to be accessing from different parts of the globe is none the wiser that we're making any changes to it. We're not having to rewrite this app so that it works with the global audience. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And that's another benefit that we have with identity orchestration is that we do it in a way that in many cases, the application doesn't know the world around it changed. But now you can allow it to be exposed and open and available to people throughout the globe if that's necessary.
This is great because, oftentimes we're speaking with customers, in the United States or here in North America as they're thinking about what it is needed for their identity infrastructure within that region, and that's obviously their purview when it comes to their role is maintaining those identity operations within that particular region. But you have your counterparts, whether they're in London or Singapore, who are doing something similar. And what I thought was of note, as you just described identity orchestration in this scenario, is that we could have multiple IDPs, we could have multiple MFA providers, we could have multiple authorization services. We think about this because each region may have selected its own IDP or MFA provider as well.
That's exactly right, Mark. And that's very, very common. In fact, it's not uncommon that a particular part of the world really likes a particular technology investment. It's also very common that different business units, or you acquire a different company and they had a different tech stack that you want to take full advantage of. And so one of the things orchestration really allows you to do simply is to take full advantage of all of the investments that are important to you and deploy them for the users that need them, but only those users that need and or have them. So that's kind of the benefit of our declarative, lightweight infrastructure as code orchestrator.
Awesome. Well, let's take a look then at the whiteboard. So it seems like a good segue as we move on to describing this infrastructure. So I think what we've got drawn out here is just an example of where that might come to be. And so maybe walk us through the diagram that we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're showing here is one of the cross-border paradigms that we've built for our customers. So here, when a user is trying to get access to an application, we're going to pick on the Canary Bank application for our demonstration today. They'll actually go through one of the Strata orchestrators. This identity orchestration fabric allows us to make these contextual switches based on the user type that we know about. So in this case, the orchestrator knows that we've got 3 different regions, and all 3 of these different regions have different ways to authenticate, different tenants, even though it may be Azure AD in multiple tenants. They have different users, they have different policies, they have different things. In the EU tenant, we may have a completely different technology, one Cosmos, paying Octo, whatever it may be. But the idea here is that as any given user tries to go to the application, the orchestrator then says, fantastic, let's go ahead and take the context that we learn about that user and let's route them to the appropriate place for authentication. But it's not just authentication. We also want to allow or restrict the access into different parts of an application based on where their native locality is. So for example, if somebody's trying to get access to this application the application in our example is going to be hosted in North America. If the user is from the US, they get full access. They can see everything that they want. However, because of the different laws and rules and regulations in the Asia Pacific region, the users that is natively working in China will be traveling into the US, accessing the same application, but they're going to use their own tenant of Azure to authenticate. And then when they get to the application, they'll only have access to some of the information that's available in the application, just because we can contextually understand those things and make a common policy that's just driven based on the user's native locality.
This is great because as we think about this, it's not just driven by government regulations or country-specific regulations. There's also corporate reasons for not allowing access as individuals travel. And so these rules, we look at the bottom left corner of the diagram here, we almost have a bingo card. Wouldn't you say that we can kind of base it on a if, then, that sort of pattern that you could dig into policy-wise?
That's exactly right. And that's exactly the policy that I built to emulate this pattern here is that when you're in your own region, you get unfettered access to those applications also in that region. However, when you go to other regions, there's going to be times where you'll still authenticate in your native region, but the access that you have within it will be limited, restricted, or allowed depending on what those rules and policies are from different parts of the country or the world.
Yeah. And so as we talk about those rules and policies, there's also a bingo card of different vendors, is there not? As we think about, the yes, no access, but then it's also which vendors are they using? Maybe a different MFA provider that we're using here in Denver versus that they use in the London manufacturing office.
That's exactly right. So all of the components that we showed earlier in the common identity services are fair game for all of this. One of the benefits of identity orchestration and the advantages is that we're not tied to any given vendor's ecosystem. We make them all better because now you can take advantage of all of those technologies regardless of what application, regardless of what identity provider is native to that region.
That's great. And you also talked about the fact that the architecture, that the way that Strata is deployed, that it can actually be deployed in regions. So sometimes people are thinking about, well, I want to do global orchestration, but is that going to mean global hops, introducing some degree of latency, going back and forth? And what you're suggesting is the orchestrator can actually live within the region as well. So the orchestration has no additional latency.
That's exactly right. By design, our orchestrator is very high performant and very low latency. But it's also just fair to say that you're going to get better performance when the orchestrator is going to be close to the applications that you care about, close to the infrastructure that's important that you care about. So one of the benefits of our orchestration fabric is that you don't have to have a centrally hosted instance of it in any region or across regions. You can put them wherever they need to be deployed, and they can all act on the same policy regardless of where they happen to be deployed. It's one of the advantages of a distributed network or a distributed infrastructure is that you don't have to have a big monolithic policy, which is where the challenges of current IDPs are today, is that you have to make a model for the entire world's set of exceptions. Well, in a distributed, orchestrated world, you can make those exceptions in local policies wherever it makes it sense for the organization.
I love it. I love it. And it's not just like remote workers working from home. We're talking, you have thousands of employees, full-time employees who are located throughout the globe in other cities and such. And so I think this is a really interesting recipe because it gives us food for thought for those identity teams working with their counterparts and peers outside of the United States or North America as they look elsewhere around the globe. And, speaking of food for thought, time to jump into the kitchen and see how this plays out.
Let's go ahead and show it.
All right.
So let's go ahead and show this recipe that we created live, and then I'm going to show you exactly what it took to build it. So over here, we've got a user, and I'm going to first log in with a user, Alan Adkins. Now, Alan is a North American-based employee, and he's trying to get to the Canary Bank application. So here, based on the policy that the orchestrator understands, we're going to send them to the North American instance of Azure. So lo and behold, we get to the application. Nothing terribly interesting has happened to this point, but now you can see Alan, while he gets access to the application, has unfettered access. He can get to every different part of the application. Now here we're echoing back. These are the bits of identity context that get passed to the application by the fabric. So we get all the standard things, first name, last name, all very easy to understand there. But we also understand the native region that Alan is from. We know that he's a North American-based employee because his native region is the US or Canada or whatever may be appropriate for your organization. So based on that, we made policy decisions to allow him to get access to all of the application without restriction. Now we're going to do the exact same thing, but we're going to come in with a different user this time. Now, the orchestrator, again, is going to redirect to the appropriate identity provider. And once again, we get access to the application. Now, it's important to note Daniel Lee is native localities in China. And so, because of the restrictive rules or the difference in rules and regulations and laws in China versus North America, we can allow him access to the application, but we don't give him unfettered access as we did with Alan. So here, when he tries to go to human resources, the fabric says, in order to get to this, I can only allow that if you happen to be natively from North America. The exact same thing happens with the analytics tab, but for the profile, we can allow. So you have the flexibility to be as specific and as fine-grained as necessary to give you all those accesses. And again, the context for Daniel is only different based on where his native country is. So you can have very complex, very robust policies set very easily and distributed to wherever they need to be.
This is perfect, because I think we missed perhaps a step to make it a little bit clear for individual here, is that Henri actually just asked, wouldn't Entra ID, or what we Azure ID as we called it here, but Microsoft Entra ID, wouldn't it natively have these controls already?
It does and it doesn't. So the blessing and the curse of all identity providers, Entra ID included, is that it's central. You have a tenant in North America. And so in many organizations, it's very difficult, if not nearly impossible, to properly give the authorization or deny the authorization for people in China, because China would have their own instance of Entra. It would be an island unto itself if it were. And so that would be the challenge.
Got it. I think we missed that because we made it seem so simple as we were saying, hey, there's Azure and there's Azure, but these are actually two Azures who have never met, perhaps. I mean, they're literally isolated and siloed oceans apart.
Exactly right. It wouldn't at all be unlike saying your North American people authenticate to Entra and then the China people use a totally different technology, Okta, for example. They're parallel technologies in that they're both there to authenticate and authorize users and give them access to things, but they're completely different, both administratively, in geography, and in policy.
Great. Well, how did you set it up? Let's take a look at this.
Fantastic. Let's go ahead and walk into that. So what I'm showing here is actually the Mavericks Cloud UI. This is where Strata gives you the ability to point and click and create configurations, policies, even very complex ones through our UI. So here we've got three primary components. The first one is the identity fabric. This is where you start talking about how do I integrate with Entra. So in this case, Entra or Azure, I went ahead and I created an integration there. For those who are familiar with these technologies, it's a simple metadata exchange. Entra thinks of the fabric as an application, and we think of Entra as an identity provider, not unlike how the applications may have already been done today. The next thing you want to do is tell us about the application that we're protecting. It doesn't matter if it's a modern application, something that understands SAML or OIDC or WebAuthn or any of the modern protocols, or if it's a legacy application like Canary Bank is. So in the legacy patterns, we'll go ahead and tell it what application am I protecting. In this case, it's going to be this application, and what pages within this application do I want to have differentiating policy on. So that just gives me kind of a foundation of how the application is expected to behave, so I know how to protect it. In order to properly protect it, we create what we refer to as a user flow. Sometimes people think of this as a user journey. So here we can go ahead and take a look at the user journey that I created. So here we're applying it to the Canary Bank application that I just shown you. We can go ahead and optionally get attribute providers. Sometimes all the information that I need isn't available in Entra or whatever IDP is appropriate to you. So I can go other places to source that, oftentimes in a directory or something of the similar, but I can go get extra things at runtime just as the sub-second that it's needed. But really where the interesting policy is here, I'm allowing all access to the root of the application just by virtue of you authenticating. If you've authenticated to one of the approved identity providers, you're in to that front page, just as you saw in the demonstration. But if you want to go to the analytics tab or the HR tab, Well, in order to get there, you have to be a part of the local locality that has that US. So, where we go in as an orchestration fabric, we can learn and glean the context about the user and then apply it in a simple, easy to read policy that gets deployed throughout that organization. Now, it's important to understand this exact same policy could be distributed in the European Union, could be deployed in Asia Pacific, so that you can use the same kind of policies globally and have the same exact policy being enforced, but its expression will be different based on what users are coming in and if they are operating in their native region.
I love it. That's another layer of that bingo card again, where it's traditionally I work out of the United States, but now I've actually traveled to Asia Pacific, or I'm in the EU. We're actually introducing all those different layers, sort of a matrixed approach to policy construction.
That's exactly right. And that's really one of the simplistic expressions of how orchestration can help you, is that rather than modeling a bunch of policies for all of your US based applications and then a separate and distinct modeling of the similar or the same applications that are in the European Union or Asia Pacific or Latin America or wherever it may be, you can have the same policy. Your auditors are going to love you for it. Your security team will love you for it, because we know it's always going to be consistent across the regions. And really, it's just the user context that will determine whether or not they get or don't get access.
This is great, because then you're also thinking, I think your app teams are going to love you, because you're not having to clone or duplicate the application and re-platform in region. You can actually, the Canary app that we used in this example is hosted in North America. It stays in North America. It's the same common global resource, but with access from different regions and different IDPs.
Yeah, where appropriate, that absolutely is the case. Or alternatively, if there is time just for latency or other real world circumstances where you would want an instance of Canary Bank to be local to the region, that's just as easily done, because it would be the same policy. You would just have an orchestrator sitting locally to that application.
So there was a question that came up from Lisa that we were showing these policies here, and she was curious if the identity team in New York would be able to control the policies in this demo scenario as easily as the identity team in Paris.
Absolutely. So one of the things I didn't talk about, but it's great since we've got a question from Lisa, all of the configurations that I created here really just end up into a little policy bundle. It's just a tiny little package of code. And so anybody in New York or even other parts of the world, if you want to allow that level of access, can go ahead and change, modify, add to these policies and distribute it wherever it's appropriate. So if you have circumstances where people in one region, one part of the business unit, one part of the organization want to draft and update these policies, but have them deployed to other parts of the world, really, really easy. Because at the end of the day, when we create this policy, it becomes this policy bundle. And then I'll go and show you what that looks like. All of this just ends up into policy expression of what are we protecting, under what circumstances do we do that, all those things we just showed you graphically. And then these automatically get pushed into your organization's ecosystem. So the orchestrators that we talked about, they don't call back to the cloud. That would be not very beneficial, and certainly in a multi-cross-border policy would slow things down tremendously. This is the problem we solve for. Get this policy, put this bundle local to wherever the orchestrator is, so that it's really hyper quick. It is following the same policies as everywhere else, but it's done and executed locally in region.
Well, this was awesome. As we think about this is oftentimes we're so focused on just our here and now, and those of us located in the United States, we're often just thinking about our operations in the US or North America. And, it's just a really narrow view, because as a multinational organization, you've got your peer teams throughout the globe who have these challenges as well. And I love that today's episode of The Kitchen, we really got into some global flavor about what the impact is when you're selecting an orchestration provider, about how important it is to have that global capability as you think about common access to a shared global resource.
That's exactly right. And somewhat of the many ways and some of the many recipes that we can hopefully help our customers solve these very complex challenges, and as simply and elegantly as we could think to.
That's great. Well, as we wrap this episode, love to invite our audience to join us, as always, for the next episode. You go to the Orchestration Kitchen Hub, and you can see the next episode that's coming up down the line, as well as replays of all of our existing kitchens that we've done together, Chef Terry. How about if they wanted to talk to you? What are the next steps they might have?
Please do. If you have additional questions that you didn't get a chance to ask us live, please don't hesitate to reach out directly to me, Terry, at strata.io, or you can reach out to us through our channels through the mavericks.strata.io, through any of those channels as well. The idea here is that we want you to get familiar with the technology. It doesn't really matter as much if I can navigate our platform. It matters if you can. And so we can get you ready to start doing those things immediately. If you want to follow these same type of patterns, you can either just try it on your own. We've got some online tutorials that will help you walk through that entire process. But if you have any questions, if you need any help, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what I'm here for.
That sounds great. Well, we've tackled yet another spicy challenge, this one with a little extra global flavor to it. And thank you, Chef Terry, as always, and also our audience. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you spending your valuable time with us. We are excited to share the next episode as it's available. And with that, we bid everyone adieu. Have a wonderful day.